You think you're slick? Put it back, right now." The words cracked through the vast concrete space like a steel girder dropped from a crane. It was 8:43 a.m. inside Midwest Industrial Components, a cavernous plant spread over 6 football fields where presses roared, forklifts beeped, and sparks spit from welders' torches. Normally, the noise swallowed every conversation, but the moment Brian Keller barked that accusation, it was as if the machines themselves faltered. The air sucked into a pause. Every head within 50 feet turned. Aisle 3, usually just another channel between storage racks and assembly stations, had suddenly become an arena. Anthony Green, 44, stood holding a small lockbox no bigger than a toolbox, tagged with a glaring yellow sticker. Quality assurance, repair evaluation. His posture was straight, his face unreadable, the box resting casually in his gloved hands. Across from him, Brian Keller's finger pointed like a weapon. His hard hat was tilted back, his safety vest slightly unzipped, and his voice had the shrill edge of someone more interested in being heard than being right. "That," Brian snapped, "doesn't belong to you." Anthony's eyes flicked to the box, then back to Keller. His tone was calm, measured. "It was logged this morning." Keller scoffed loudly, turning slightly so others could hear. "Sure it was. That's what every thief says." Nearby workers froze mid-task. Danielle Moore, a process engineer with a clipboard tucked under her arm, stopped halfway through noting torque values. Her eyes narrowed. She knew exactly whose signature had gone into the system that morning. Miguel Alvarez, a stocky forklift operator, halted mid-turn, one boot planted against his pallet jack. His instinct was to stay out of management fights, but this one felt different. Even Emma Collins, the youngest intern on the floor, barely out of college, peeked over her oversized safety goggles. She had never seen the floor manager raise his voice like that in public. At the far end of the aisle, Harold Dixon, 58, the union rep, leaned against the punch clock, his weathered hands resting on his belt. He'd seen hundreds of conflicts, but his instincts prickled. This wasn't routine. This was dangerous. Anthony set the box down on the steel bench beside him, deliberate and calm. The clang echoed like punctuation. He folded his hands in front of him. "Run the log, Keller." Brian laughed harshly. "Or maybe I'll run security. Thieves always know how to make paper look clean. Doesn't mean it's real." Danielle stepped forward, her voice firm. "I stood right there when Green signed it out, 812 sharp. My initials are in the system too." Brian didn't even look at her. His eyes stayed locked on Anthony. "Of course you'd cover for him. Friends cover each other's tracks." "Cover?" Danielle snapped. "This isn't cover. This is facts." Brian spread his arms, raising his voice so it carried over the machinery. "Facts? Here's a fact. You don't just waltz through this plant with restricted parts. Not unless you're trying to walk them out the door." The words "walk them out" landed like an insult. A low murmur spread across the floor. Workers leaned in, pretending to check gauges, but really listening. A welder even flipped up his mask, the blue glare of his torch still glowing behind him. Anthony's voice cut through the noise, calm as tempered steel. "You've made an accusation. Now prove it." Brian stepped closer, his boots heavy on the concrete. His face glistened with sweat, not from work, but from adrenaline. "You think you can stare me down, Green? I've been running this floor 18 months. I know every trick, every scam, every way people try to cut corners." Anthony tilted his head slightly. "And in all that time, what have you actually learned?" A few workers stifled grins. Keller's jaw tightened. "That's it," he snapped, grabbing his radio. He pressed the button with exaggerated force. "Security, aisle 3, now." Danielle's jaw dropped. "Brian, this is insane. The box is logged. You're dragging security for what, show?" Keller barked back. "Step aside, Moore. If he's clean, security will clear him. If he's not, then we caught him red-handed." Anthony's reply was sharp, though his voice never rose. "Red-handed? Standing in plain view, carrying equipment tagged for repair, logged in the system with a witness? That's your definition of red-handed?" The tension crackled. From the catwalk above, Tom Riley, lead security guard, began his walk down the metal stairs. A tall man in his mid-40s with broad shoulders, he wasn't quick to act, but he carried presence. Workers usually relaxed when Tom was near. Not today. The crowd shifted. Miguel muttered to Emma, "This is about to blow up." Emma whispered, "Why doesn't Green just tell him who he is?" Miguel shook his head. "Because Green doesn't need to shout to win." Harold Dixon finally pushed off the wall. His voice, deep and gravelly, rolled across the space. "Keller, you better think hard before you sling a word like theft. You can't unsay it once it's out, and every worker here knows it." Brian snapped his head around. "Stay out of this, Dixon." Harold folded his arms. "This is my business, because the minute you call a man a thief without proof, you poison the whole floor. And I don't care if he's engineer, welder, or janitor. You don't brand a man without evidence." The murmur of agreement grew stronger. Heads nodded. Even workers who rarely spoke up were shifting closer, their eyes locked on the confrontation. Anthony hadn't moved an inch. His voice came steady, almost quiet. "You don't want to do this, Keller." "Oh, I do," Brian shot back. His voice cracked with the strain of volume. "Because I'll be damned if I lose my job while people like you sneak things out under my nose." Anthony's eyes sharpened. "Then you've already lost more than you realize." The words hung in the air, heavier than steel. And that was when Tom Riley finally reached them, scanning the scene. "What's the issue?" Brian pointed straight at Anthony. Caught him taking restricted materials. Right off the floor. Anthony didn't flinch. He simply gestured calmly toward the box. "Authorization 7743. Signed at 8:12. Witnessed by Moore. Run the log." Danielle nodded firmly. "I was there." Brian sneered. "She's covering. Check it yourself." Tom glanced at Harold, then back at the crowd, then sighed and moved to the terminal. Fingers tapped, screens blinked. The tension stretched tighter. The floor held its breath. Tom Riley turned back toward the group, the screen still glowing behind him. His voice was careful, deliberate. "Authorization 7743, signed by Green, witnessed by Moore, logged at 8:12 a.m. Gasps spread across the floor. Danielle exhaled loudly. Miguel muttered, "Told you." But Brian Keller, he only smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. "Paper can lie," he said. "Logs can be doctored, and I'll prove it." The words sent another shiver through the workers. Anthony Green didn't move. He simply folded his hands again, his eyes locked on Brian. Calm, steady, because he knew. This was only the beginning. The floor should have gone back to normal after Tom Riley read the log. That's how these things usually ended. A misunderstanding, a quick check, then back to work. But not today, because instead of backing down, Brian Keller doubled down. "Paper lies," Brian said again, louder now, his words echoing off the steel racks. "Logs can be doctored, and I'll prove it." The air thickened. Workers glanced at one another, unsure if they should laugh or stay quiet. Some shifted uncomfortably, others leaned in like spectators at a prize fight. Anthony Green didn't flinch. His hands stayed folded, his eyes steady. "You've made your claim. Show your proof." Danielle Moore stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Brian, you just heard it confirmed. Green signed it. I witnessed it. What more do you want?" Brian snapped back without missing a beat. "What I want is accountability. Just because you were standing there doesn't mean you weren't part of it." Gasps broke out. Danielle's face flushed red. "Excuse me?" Brian's tone hardened. "You two are always in the cage together, always moving materials. Don't act like this isn't a cover." Miguel Alvarez muttered from the sidelines. "He's digging his own grave." But Brian wasn't finished. He turned toward the watching workers. "Think about it. Missing parts, mismatched counts, auditors breathing down my neck. And then this guy," he jabbed a finger at Anthony, "shows up with a box nobody else saw. Doesn't add up, does it?" Some workers frowned, not because they believed him, but because his words dripped with the kind of suspicion that made people doubt what they already knew. Anthony finally spoke, calm as ever. "It adds up perfectly. You just don't like the math." Tom Riley shifted uncomfortably. Security wasn't supposed to take sides, but the tension was impossible to ignore. "Keller," Tom said slowly, "the system's clean. Green's authorization is valid. If you want to push this, we need to escalate through HR. Brian smirked. Already ahead of you. He lifted his radio again. HR, report to aisle 3. Urgent. Danielle's jaw dropped. Are you serious? You're calling HR for a logged, verified transaction? Brian ignored her. Harold Dixon, arms crossed, finally spoke. Tom, you don't need to wait for HR. You've got enough right in front of you. Green's cleared. Keller's just making noise. Tom looked at Harold, then at Anthony, then back at Brian. It's not that simple. Anthony's voice cut through. Yes, it is, but let him escalate. Let every word be logged. The way he said it, steady, certain, sent a ripple of curiosity through the workers. Danielle frowned, catching the tone. Miguel leaned forward, sensing something more under Green's calm. Inside Brian Keller's head, panic wrestled with pride. He'd built his career on control, on barking orders, pushing blame, keeping the floor fearful enough to obey. And now, in front of everyone, that control was slipping. But instead of retreating, his instincts screamed at him to push harder. If he admitted fault, he'd look weak. If he doubled down, at least he'd look strong. And strength, he thought, always won. He didn't notice the way eyes were shifting. He didn't notice the way Harold's voice carried weight the floor trusted. He didn't notice the way Anthony's stillness was starting to look more like command than compliance. Brian Keller only noticed himself, and that blindness was digging him deeper. By 9:05 a.m., Laura Benton, the plant's HR representative, arrived. Her heels clicked sharply on the concrete, her tablet in hand. "What's the situation?" she asked, her tone brisk, her eyes scanning the crowd. Brian stepped forward like a man seizing salvation. "Caught Green moving restricted material. System shows it under his name, but I'm telling you, it's suspicious. Logs can be doctored." Laura frowned. "Did you verify?" Tom Riley gestured toward the terminal. "Yes, authorization 7743, signed at 8:12, witnessed by Moore. Everything checks out." Laura turned to Anthony. "Do you confirm this?" Anthony's reply was simple. "Yes." Laura tapped rapidly on her tablet, scrolling through entries. Within moments, she looked up. "It's there. Clean. Logged. No inconsistencies." Danielle exhaled loudly. "Thank you." But Brian wasn't finished. "Logs don't mean anything if the person writing them is dirty." The crowd stirred again, voices rising in murmurs. Emma Collins whispered, "He won't quit, will he?" Miguel shook his head. "Never seen him back down, even when he's wrong." Laura's tone hardened. "Brian, do you have actual evidence of misconduct?" Brian crossed his arms. "Not yet, but I know what I saw." Laura sighed. "What you saw was an engineer moving authorized equipment." Brian's jaw tightened. "Or a thief hiding in plain sight." Anthony didn't move, didn't raise his voice. He simply spoke, his tone low but sharp enough to slice through the noise. "You've called me a thief. You've dismissed witnesses. You've dragged security and HR into this. And still, you've produced nothing but suspicion." He leaned slightly forward. "The question isn't what you saw. It's why you see me this way." Gasps whispered through the workers. Danielle's eyes burned. Miguel's jaw tightened. Harold's face darkened with recognition. Brian hesitated just for a moment. Then he smirked, trying to cover the slip. "Because it doesn't add up." Anthony didn't blink. "Or because I don't add up to you." The words landed heavy. Everyone knew what he meant, even if Brian pretended not to. Harold Dixon stepped closer, his voice booming. "Keller, you crossed a line. You think suspicion is a shield, but it's a sword you can't control. You've swung it at Green, but it cut this whole floor." Danielle added, and everyone here saw it. The murmurs grew louder, angrier. Workers weren't just whispering anymore, they were choosing sides, and the sides weren't even. Laura Benton raised a hand, trying to regain order. "This isn't a tribunal. If Keller wants to escalate, fine. I'll log the allegation, but without evidence, it ends here." Anthony nodded slightly. "Log it. Let it stand. Words have weight. Let it be recorded." The certainty in his voice startled Laura. It startled the workers too, because no one invited scrutiny like that unless they had nothing to fear. Brian's mind raced. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He thought the floor would rally behind him, that suspicion would spread like fire. But instead, it was turning on him. And worse, Green wasn't cracking. Not a flicker of panic, not a raised voice, not even anger. Just calm, steady defiance. Brian's pride screamed at him, "Push harder." So he did. He stepped closer, his voice rising. "You all think he's some saint? You think he's untouchable? Open your eyes. Missing parts don't disappear by magic. Someone's to blame, and Green's always at the center. You'll thank me when I prove it." The crowd muttered louder, but this time with less agreement. Miguel spat on the floor, disgusted. Danielle shook her head. Harold growled low in his throat. Anthony finally raised his head fully, his voice carrying over the growing noise. "And when you can't prove it, Keller, what then? Do you apologize? Do you step down? Or do you keep pointing fingers until there's no one left to blame?" The silence after was deafening. Laura Benton's tablet buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, her face paling. She looked at Anthony, then back at Brian. "Corporate compliance has flagged this incident," she announced. "They're watching. Everything we say, everything we do is being recorded in real time." The floor erupted in whispers. Emma gasped. Miguel muttered, "Now it's real." Harold crossed his arms tighter. Danielle smirked faintly, relief flickering across her face. "But Brian Keller?" He smiled, a strange, reckless smile. "Good," he said. "Let them watch. Because when I bring Green down, I want the whole company to see it." Anthony Green didn't blink. He only folded his hands again, calm as ever. Because he knew. The storm was only getting started. The factory didn't sound the same anymore. Machines still pressed steel into shape. Forklifts still beeped as they wheeled pallets across aisles. And welders still sent showers of sparks flashing under hoods. But none of it mattered, because the heartbeat of the plant had shifted. Every ear, every eye, every ounce of attention was fixed on aisle 3, where a standoff had gone from an accusation to a spectacle. And now, with corporate compliance officially monitoring in real time, it had become something else entirely, a test. Laura Benton lowered her tablet slowly, her expression tight. "Compliance is watching. That means every word is logged, every action reviewed. This is no longer just a floor issue, it's a corporate matter." The workers stirred. The whispers grew louder. Miguel Alvarez leaned toward Emma Collins, his voice low. "If corporate's got eyes on this, Keller's finished." Emma's eyes were wide. "Unless he's right," Miguel snorted. "Kid, Green's not the one sweating bullets." Danielle Moore, arms crossed, stepped forward. "Brian, this should end here. The system confirmed Green. HR confirmed Green. Security confirmed Green. Stop digging before you bury yourself." But Brian Keller wasn't listening. He was staring at Anthony Green, eyes narrowed, lips twisted in something between a smirk and a snarl. "Perfect," he said. "Let compliance watch. When I prove you're dirty, Green, I want the whole company to see." Anthony didn't move. His posture was still, almost statuesque, hands folded lightly in front of him. His eyes were steady, but not cold. His breathing was even, as though none of this rattled him. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, but it carried clearly. "You've accused me of theft. You've dismissed witnesses. You've rejected the system itself. And now you want to turn suspicion into proof. But suspicion is not proof, Keller, and it never will be." The words hit like a hammer striking an anvil. Sharp, resonant, final. The workers shifted again. A ripple of murmurs spread. Some nodded, some whispered. But all of them knew they'd just heard something heavier than a rebuttal. It sounded like authority, but Brian Keller wasn't about to back down. His pride was chained to this moment. He stepped closer, his voice rising. "You think you can talk circles around me, Green? You think a calm voice makes you innocent? I've been on this floor long enough to know when something smells wrong. And you," he jabbed a finger at Anthony's chest, "you stink of it." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Danielle's face flushed. Miguel cursed under his breath. Emma's hand flew to her mouth. Anthony didn't even look at the finger aimed at him. His gaze stayed fixed on Brian's eyes. "Be careful," he said quietly, "because every word you speak now is not just heard, it is recorded." Brian faltered, just for a breath, but pride shoved him forward again. "Then let it be recorded." Harold Dixon stepped in, his boots echoing on the concrete. He positioned himself between Anthony and Brian, not to separate them, but to anchor the room. "Keller," Harold said, his voice deep and slow, "you're so busy shouting about thieves that you don't hear yourself. You're on record now. Every insult, every baseless claim, it's all in compliance logs. You keep this up, and you won't just lose this floor, you'll lose your career." Brian sneered. "You think I care about what some old union man says?" Harold's eyes narrowed. "I think you care about paychecks, and I think you care about power, but you don't care about truth, and that's what'll sink you." The workers murmured louder, siding with Harold. Anthony didn't move, but the faintest flicker of gratitude crossed his eyes. Laura's tablet buzzed again. She scanned the screen, her face paling. "Corporate just sent a note. They've assigned a compliance officer to observe live. He'll be patched in through video within minutes." The crowd gasped. Miguel muttered, "They're really watching us." Emma whispered, "This is bigger than I thought." Brian grinned, though the grin was strained. "Good, let them watch. Let them see me catch him in the act." Danielle barked a laugh, sharp and bitter. "Catch him? The only thing you've caught is yourself tripping over your own pride." Inside Anthony, a storm of memories swirled, but he didn't let any of it show. He thought of being accused at 25 of falsifying an inspection report he hadn't touched. He thought of being mistaken for a driver outside a conference where he was the keynote. He thought of eyes that had looked at him not as an engineer, not as a leader, but as a problem waiting to be proven. And now here he stood again. But unlike before, this time he wasn't powerless. This time he wasn't waiting for someone else to clear his name. This time the truth wasn't just on his side, it was in his hands. Miguel spoke up suddenly, his voice strong. "Keller, I've worked this floor 10 years. I've moved hundreds of parts in and out of cages. And I'll tell you this, Green's the only one who's never treated us like crooks. He doesn't need to prove anything to me." Danielle added, her voice firmer. "And I was his witness. Are you calling me a liar too?" Brian snapped, "If the shoe fits." The crowd erupted in gasps and mutters. Harold growled. Emma looked stricken. Even Tom Riley, the security guard, shifted uncomfortably. Anthony finally spoke again. "Keller, you're not just accusing me anymore. You're accusing this entire floor, and the floor won't forget it." The words landed heavy, because every worker there knew it was true. Laura's tablet buzzed once more. She glanced at the screen. Compliance officer connected. Live feed. A voice, tinny through her speaker, filled the aisle. "This is Robert from Corporate Compliance. I've been monitoring. Continue." The crowd stiffened. Even Brian faltered, his face paling just slightly. Anthony, though, nodded calmly toward the device. "Good. Let's continue." Robert's voice came again. "Mr. Keller, we've heard your accusations. Do you have evidence beyond suspicion?" The floor went dead quiet. All eyes turned to Brian Keller. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He stammered, his pride and fear wrestling in silence. "And Anthony Green?" He simply folded his hands again, steady as steel, because he knew the walls of suspicion were starting to close. On Keller, not him. The factory floor had never been this quiet. Not during power outages, not during emergency drills, not even during the night shift lulls. The voice coming through Laura Benton's tablet cut through the stillness like a blade. "Mr. Keller, we've heard your accusations. Do you have evidence beyond suspicion?" It was Robert Lang, Corporate Compliance Officer, patched in live from headquarters 2 states away. His tone was clipped, bureaucratic, but the weight it carried was unmistakable. Brian Keller's mouth opened, closed, opened again. His hands twitched at his sides. I know what I saw," he said finally, his voice louder than necessary. "Green had that lockbox, moving it across the floor without clearance. That's evidence enough." The crowd stirred, murmurs swelling. Danielle Moore's eyes flashed. "Evidence enough? Logs don't lie, Brian. And you heard Tom confirm it. You heard me confirm it." Miguel Alvarez muttered under his breath. Guys cooked. But Brian pressed on, desperation leaking through his words. "Logs can be faked. Witnesses can be biased. I'm protecting this company, and I won't apologize for that." Robert's voice came again, tinny but firm. "Mr. Keller, suspicion is not evidence. Company policy requires documented proof before theft allegations are made. You bypass that. Why? Brian's face flushed red. Because if I wait for proof, it's too late. By then the parts are gone. We've lost thousands in inventory before. Somebody's responsible. Robert didn't miss a beat. And you believe that somebody is green? Yes, Brian snapped. Why? Brian faltered. His eyes darted to Anthony, standing silent, hands folded, calm as ever. Then back to the crowd, restless and watchful. Finally to Laura, whose lips were pressed into a thin, disapproving line. Because, he started, voice dropping. Because he's always moving things, always walking the floor, always... He stopped. Robert's voice sharpened. Always what? Brian swallowed hard. He had nothing but his own pride. Anthony Green finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost too calm. Keller, you've accused me of theft. You've accused Moore of lying. You've accused the system of fraud. And now, in front of corporate, you can't say why. Do you know what that means? Brian glared at him, but the glare was weak, the kind of anger that hides fear. Anthony stepped closer, just slightly. His voice carried enough to reach every corner of the aisle. It means the only thing you've proven is your own bias. The crowd erupted in murmurs again. Danielle folded her arms, nodding firmly. Miguel muttered, Amen. Emma Collins looked from one face to another, her young eyes wide with realization. Harold Dixon stepped forward now, his boots echoing on the concrete. Corporate, let me say this plain. I've been in this plant 40 years. I've seen men fired for less, and I've seen men protected for worse. But this is the first time I've watched a manager accuse a worker of theft in front of half the floor without a shred of proof. Robert's voice replied, Your statement is noted, Mr. Dixon. Harold's jaw tightened. Note this too. Every worker here saw it. You can't sweep this under a rug. Not this time. Applause rippled through the crowd. Not loud, but sharp, deliberate claps that carried weight. Brian's face twisted. You're all against me. Every one of you. He turned back to Robert, his words rushing out. You don't understand. Green's got them fooled. He walks around like he owns the place, like he's untouchable. That's why they're protecting him. Anthony's voice slid in, calm but cutting. Or maybe they're not protecting me, Keller. Maybe they're protecting the truth. Gasps. Whispers. The workers leaned closer, the tension crackling. Robert's voice came again. Mr. Keller, your comments are becoming increasingly personal. This is not professional conduct. Brian snapped. You think he's professional? Look at him, acting like he's better than everyone, acting like he runs the floor. The words hung, heavy, dangerous, because for the first time Brian had stumbled close to the truth. Anthony didn't correct him, not fully. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his tone even. Run the floor? That's an interesting choice of words. Tell me, Keller, why does it bother you that I walk these aisles? That I carry a clipboard? That I check logs myself? Brian spat the words. Because it's not your job. That's management's role, not yours. The workers stirred, confused. Danielle smirked faintly, recognizing the game. Miguel leaned forward. Emma frowned, sensing something bigger underneath. Anthony pressed. So in your view, walking the floor isn't an engineer's job. Watching the system isn't an engineer's job. Making sure workers have what they need isn't an engineer's job. Interesting. Brian hesitated, realizing too late that the words sounded wrong, petty, small. Robert's voice broke the silence. Mr. Keller, are you suggesting Green has been performing duties above his role? Brian froze. His eyes flicked toward Anthony, then back to the crowd. I'm saying, he acts like he runs things. Anthony smiled faintly, just faintly. Miguel muttered, acts like he runs things, maybe because he does. Danielle smirked wider. Careful, Keller, you're closer to the truth than you realize. Emma whispered, wait, what do they mean? Harold Dixon folded his arms, his gaze never leaving Anthony. Means there's more to Green than Keller ever knew. Brian's face twisted, his voice cracked. So what? So he's got friends, he's got people covering for him, so what? Doesn't mean he's clean, doesn't mean he's not stealing. Robert's tone hardened. Mr. Keller, enough. We've logged your allegations. We've also logged the lack of evidence. At this stage, you are in violation of corporate policy for making baseless accusations. Brian's jaw dropped. Violation? I was protecting the company. Robert's reply was blunt. And instead, you've exposed it. Through it all, Anthony remained still, unshaken, unmoved. When he finally spoke, his words weren't loud, but they carried like a hammer strike. Keller, you've built your whole case on fear. Fear of missing parts, fear of being blamed, fear of losing control, but fear doesn't make truth, and fear doesn't make leadership. He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. Leadership is standing in the fire and not flinching. Leadership is trusting the facts when your pride screams louder. Leadership is calm when chaos rattles the walls. That's something you never learned. The floor roared, not with machines, but with voices. Applause, cheers, nods of agreement. Brian's face crumpled. For the first time, his shoulders sagged. Robert's voice cut back in. Director-level management has been alerted. A vice president will be on site within the hour to review this incident personally. The crowd gasped. Emma whispered, "A vice president." Miguel grinned. "Now it's big." Danielle glanced at Anthony, her smirk now a full smile. "Guess Keller's about to learn who he's really dealing with." Anthony said nothing. He just folded his hands again, steady as stone, because he knew the storm was about to break wide open. The tension on the plant floor didn't ease after Robert Lang's words. If anything, it grew sharper. A vice president coming down in person was rare. In the world of Midwest industrial components, vice presidents didn't leave their polished offices lightly. They sent emails, they held video calls, they signed memos. But to step into the concrete, steel, and grease of the factory floor, that meant trouble, big trouble. The workers knew it, the supervisors knew it, even Tom Riley, the usually unshakable head of security, shifted uneasily at the thought. Brian Keller, however, took it as his last lifeline. Brian's voice rang out, sharper than before. "Good. Let the VP come down here. Finally, someone with real authority. We'll see who they believe when they see Green parading around with company property like it's his." Danielle Moore barked a laugh. "You really think doubling down is going to save you?" Brian glared. "You think one engineer and a clipboard scare me? Wait until real leadership gets here. Then we'll see who's smiling." Anthony Green didn't reply. He just looked at Brian with that same steady gaze, calm enough to be unnerving. Because the truth was, Anthony already knew how this would play out. The murmurs grew louder. Groups of welders, machinists, and operators clustered together, whispering behind hands. Miguel Alvarez muttered to Emma Collins, "He's still digging." Emma frowned. "Why? He already lost." Miguel shook his head. "Because pride makes fools of men. Keller's got it in spades." Harold Dixon, standing nearby, rumbled in agreement. "He thinks the VP will save him. What he doesn't realize is that the VP's not coming for Green. He's coming for him." Emma tilted her head. "How can you be so sure?" Harold's eyes flicked to Anthony. "Because Green doesn't look worried. Not one bit." Laura Benton, HR tablet still in hand, stepped closer to Brian. Her voice was sharp, clipped. "Keller, you need to stop talking. Every word you say now digs the hole deeper. You've already violated policy. If you don't shut your mouth, you'll bury yourself." Brian sneered. "Spare me the lecture, Laura. You're HR. You'll say whatever covers the company. Well, this time I'm covering it, and when the VP gets here, he'll thank me." Laura's lips tightened. "You still don't get it, do you?" Anthony spoke softly, his tone measured. "He doesn't want to get it. Pride doesn't listen to reason." Brian turned, his face red. "Reason? You call this reason? You walk this floor like you own it. You act like the rules don't apply to you. Well, rules apply to everyone. Even you, Green." Anthony's reply was steady. "I never said they didn't. But rules aren't weapons, Keller. They're responsibilities. And you've turned them into something they were never meant to be." The crowd stirred, whispers louder now. Danielle smirked. Miguel muttered, "He's schooling him without breaking a sweat." Emma clutched her clipboard tighter, whispering, "It's like Green's not even afraid." Harold Dixon answered quietly, "That's because he doesn't need to be." At 10 a.m. sharp, the plant's double doors swung open. In stepped Richard Coleman, Vice President of Operations. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a navy suit that seemed out of place against the grease-stained concrete, Coleman carried the air of authority like a mantle. He didn't hurry. He didn't posture. He simply walked, and the crowd parted instinctively. The noise of machines seemed to lower on its own, as if even steel knew better than to interrupt. Richard stopped in front of the group, his eyes scanning the scene. They lingered on the yellow-tagged lockbox sitting on the bench, then moved to Anthony, then to Brian. Finally, his voice came, deep, steady, and deliberate. "What's going on here?" Brian stepped forward immediately, desperate to seize control. "Sir, thank you for coming. I caught Green moving restricted material across the floor without proper clearance. I reported it to security, HR, even compliance. Logs say one thing, but I know what I saw, and I won't let company property walk out under my watch." Richard raised an eyebrow. "You're Keller, correct?" "Yes, sir, floor manager." Richard's gaze moved past him to Anthony. "And you're Green?" Anthony inclined his head. "Yes." Brian cut in quickly. "He'll tell you it's logged, but I'm telling you something's off. I've had shortages for months, and every time he's there. Always moving parts, always walking the floor like he runs it." Richard's gaze sharpened. "Is that so?" Anthony's reply was calm even. "Authorization 7743, signed at 8:12 this morning. Witnessed by Moore, confirmed by security, confirmed by HR, confirmed by compliance. The only thing missing here is evidence." Richard's eyes moved to Laura. "Accurate?" Laura nodded firmly. "Yes, all confirmed." Richard turned back to Brian. "So where's your proof?" Brian's voice rose, frantic now. "Proof? Proof isn't always on paper. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts. And my instincts say he's dirty." The workers groaned. Danielle muttered, "Instincts aren't policy." Miguel shook his head. Harold growled deep in his chest. Anthony finally spoke again, his words cutting sharp. "Instincts don't clear audits, facts do." Richard's gaze hardened. "Mr. Keller, corporate compliance flagged this because you escalated it. Now I'm here. What I see is one engineer following protocol and one manager refusing to accept it. If you have evidence, present it. If not, you're wasting my time." Brian's face crumpled. He's hiding something, I know it." Richard's tone was cold. "Know and prove are not the same thing." Anthony's voice slid in, calm but unmistakably firm. "Keller doesn't care about proof. He cares about control. He thinks shouting louder makes him right. But control built on fear always collapses." The crowd erupted in murmurs, louder this time. The workers were no longer neutral. They were taking sides. And the side wasn't Keller's. Danielle raised her voice. "I was his witness. Keller just called me a liar in front of the floor." Miguel added, "He accused me of stealing last week over a pallet miscount. Turned out it was his mistake." Harold stepped forward, his voice booming. "This man's pattern isn't protection, it's persecution. And every worker here knows it." The murmurs turned into applause, slow at first, then stronger. Brian's face turned crimson. "You're all against me." Anthony's reply was steady. "No, Keller, we're against lies." Richard Coleman raised his hand, silencing the noise. His gaze swept across the floor, then settled on Brian. "Keller, compliance will finish their review, but from where I stand, you've already crossed lines you can't uncross." Brian stammered. "You can't—" Richard's tone cut like steel. "Enough, this isn't your floor anymore." Gasps echoed through the plant. Emma whispered, "Did he just—" Miguel grinned. "Oh, it's happening." "And Anthony Green?" He stood silent, steady, his eyes never leaving Keller. Because he knew. The truth was inching closer to the surface. The moment Richard Coleman's words dropped, "This isn't your floor anymore," the plant floor shifted. It wasn't just noise or whispers this time. It was energy, a ripple that rolled through welders, machinists, forklift drivers, engineers, even the new interns. Everyone felt it. For the first time, Brian Keller wasn't the one holding the room. Brian's face flushed crimson. His voice cracked as he tried to claw back control. "You can't say that. I'm the floor manager. I run this shift. Without me, production grinds to a halt." Richard Coleman's gaze didn't waver. "Without you, the floor looks steadier than it has in the last half hour." The crowd rumbled with murmurs of agreement. Danielle Moore muttered under her breath, "About time." Miguel Alvarez let out a low chuckle. Emma Collins bit her lip to keep from smiling. Brian swung toward the workers. "Don't fool yourselves. You think Green will protect you? He's not your friend. He's just another cog in the machine. And once corporate's done with me, they'll find someone else to ride you harder." Harold Dixon stepped forward, arms folded. That might have scared people once. Not anymore. Not after what we just saw. Richard Coleman raised his hand for silence. His voice was low, but every syllable carried. "Brian Keller, effective immediately. You are suspended pending full review by compliance. Hand over your badge to security." Gasps rippled across the floor. Tom Riley, the security guard, stepped forward, his boots echoing on the concrete. His tone was professional but firm. "Badge, Keller." Brian staggered back. "You can't be serious." Richard's voice was cold. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Brian's hands shook as he unclipped the plastic badge from his vest. He hesitated, eyes darting to the workers, then to Anthony, then back to Richard. "This isn't fair," he spat. "I was protecting the company." Anthony finally spoke, calm as ever. "Protecting it from what?" "The truth." The words landed heavy. Brian's jaw tightened, but he placed the badge in Tom Riley's outstretched hand. The click of plastic against palm sounded like a gavel. The room exhaled all at once as though a storm cloud had moved. Miguel muttered, "Didn't think I'd live to see that." Danielle crossed her arms, her smirk widening. Emma whispered, "It feels lighter." Harold's voice boomed. "You see? That's what happens when you try to build power on fear. It crumbles." Applause broke out. Tentative at first, then louder. Workers clapped, some cheered, a few even whistled. Brian's eyes darted around wildly. The applause wasn't for him. It never had been. "You're all fools!" Brian shouted over the noise. His voice was raw, desperate. "You think Green's your savior? He's not. He's just a slick talker, walking around like he owns the place. You'll regret siding with him." Anthony tilted his head slightly, his voice cutting clean through the chaos. "And why does that bother you so much, Keller? That I walk the floor? That I talk to the people who make this place run? Or that they trust me when they don't trust you?" The applause grew louder. Workers nodded, murmuring agreement. Brian's lips trembled. "You don't run this floor. You don't." Anthony's eyes locked on his. "Then why do you keep saying I do?" The crowd gasped. Miguel slapped his thigh, grinning. Danielle laughed outright. Emma whispered, "He's not even denying it anymore." Richard Coleman stepped forward, voice like steel. "Let me be perfectly clear. Green followed procedure. Green logged the part. Green had a witness. Keller, you ignored all of that and escalated a baseless accusation to security, HR, and corporate compliance. That's not protection. That's negligence." Laura Benton added, her HR tone sharper than usual. "And it's harassment. Public, baseless, humiliating. That's a violation of corporate code." Brian staggered, his face draining. "You're all against me. Every one of you. This is a setup." Anthony's reply was steady. "No, Keller, it's a reckoning." For a brief moment, Anthony's mind flickered back years. He remembered being fresh out of graduate school, accused of signing off on a faulty safety inspection. He hadn't. The error was traced to a supplier, but by then, whispers had spread. His reputation carried a scar it didn't deserve. He remembered the first time someone told him he looked out of place at a leadership meeting, as if the color of his skin outweighed the quality of his work. He remembered a conference in Houston where he was mistaken for a delivery driver outside his own keynote presentation. All of it built to this moment. And now, watching Keller unravel in front of the very floor he tried to control, Anthony knew this wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who'd ever been branded before proof, silenced before truth. Tom Riley gestured toward the door. "Time to go, Keller." Brian backed away, shaking his head. No, I built this floor. I held it together while everyone else quit. You can't throw me out like trash." Richard Coleman's tone was final. "Watch me." Brian's eyes darted around, looking for an ally. Any ally. But the faces staring back were cold, resolute, unyielding. Danielle's glare cut him. Miguel's smirk burned him. Emma's wide eyes judged him. Harold's stance blocked him. And Anthony's calm, steady gaze pierced him. For the first time, Brian Keller had no weapons left. Tom Riley stepped behind him, firm hand on his shoulder. "Let's go." Brian resisted for a moment, but Tom's grip was unshakable. Slowly, Keller was guided toward the double doors. His boots echoed on the concrete, each step heavier than the last. The workers followed him with their eyes. No one clapped, no one cheered, no one offered comfort. When the doors shut behind him, the silence that followed was louder than his shouting had ever been. Anthony finally turned to the workers. His voice was calm even. "What you just witnessed wasn't about me. It wasn't even about Keller. It was about truth and about trust." He scanned the room, his gaze steady. This plant doesn't run on suspicion. It runs on steel, sweat, and trust. And when someone throws suspicion louder than proof, it poisons all of us. That ends today. The crowd erupted in applause, louder, fuller, more unified. Harold Dixon's booming voice cut through. "That's leadership right there. You don't shout down the truth, you stand with it." Richard Coleman raised his voice over the cheers. "This matter isn't over. Compliance will dig into Keller's past behavior, and reforms will come from this. But one thing's clear. This plant just saw who really leads." Emma whispered. "Did he just—" Miguel grinned. "Yeah, he's hinting." Danielle smirked. And Keller was right about one thing. Green does run this floor. Anthony didn't deny it. He just folded his hands, his gaze steady, silent. Because he knew. The truth was no longer just close. It was inevitable. The heavy clang of the double doors still echoed when Tom Riley returned to the floor alone, Keller's badge dangling in his hand like a severed cord. The crowd of workers stayed clustered in aisle 3. No one rushing back to machines. No one pretending this was business as usual. They had just watched a manager fall, and not in a quiet, behind-the-scenes way. In public, loud, recorded. The air buzzed with whispers. Some carried relief, some carried awe, others carried something else. Vindication. Laura Benton's tablet buzzed again. She frowned, then looked at Richard Coleman. "Corporate compliance just sent an update. They're digging through Keller's file." Richard nodded. "Read it." Laura hesitated, then spoke loud enough for the floor to hear. 6 prior complaints. Workers accused of misconduct, insubordination, even theft. In every case, no evidence. All complaints closed quietly. Gasps erupted. Danielle Moore cursed under her breath. Miguel Alvarez shook his head, disgusted. Emma Collins clutched her clipboard tighter. 6? He did this 6 times? Harold Dixon's voice boomed. "I knew it. I said it. This wasn't his first show. Just the first one that blew up in his face." Anthony Green stood still, his eyes on the floor, his hands folded. He said nothing, but his silence carried weight. Danielle stepped forward, her voice sharp. "I told you he accused me of covering things up. He said I falsified a torque report. I spent a week proving I didn't." Miguel added, his tone bitter. "Last month he accused me of skimming pallets. Turned out it was his own miscount. Did he admit it? No. He blamed me for slowing him down. A machinist called out from the back. He said I sabotaged a press to get overtime. My name still floats around because of it." The voices rose one after another, spilling out years of frustration. Keller's absence seemed to break a dam, and now the water flooded. Richard Coleman listened, his jaw tight. "All of this should have been caught, and it wasn't." Laura's voice was clipped. "Compliance is reopening every case." Finally, Anthony spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise. "And now you see why suspicion without proof is poison. Keller didn't just fail to lead, he infected the floor. He turned trust into fear, and when that happens, production doesn't suffer first. People do." The workers murmured in agreement, nodding. Anthony's gaze swept across them, steady. "That's why rules exist. Not to give managers weapons, to give workers protection. If you forget that, you forget what keeps this place alive." Danielle's lips curled into a faint smile. Miguel nodded hard. Emma whispered, "He talks like he's more than an engineer." Harold grunted in agreement. "That's because he is." Even gone, Keller's presence lingered. Emma asked quietly, "Do you think he'll come back?" Harold shook his head. "Not in the same way. Suspension's just a polite word for the beginning of the end. He'll fight it, sure, but after this, he's done." Miguel muttered, "Should have been done years ago." Danielle looked at Anthony. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" Anthony's eyes met hers. Calm. Patient. "I knew truth always finds its way out. It just takes longer when pride gets in the way." Richard studied him closely, arms folded. "Green, you're steady. Too steady. Most people accused of theft, dragged through HR and compliance, they'd be rattled. You're not. Why?" The workers turned, curious. Anthony's voice was even. "Because fear doesn't change facts, and because I've been here before." A murmur spread. Emma tilted her head. "Before?" Anthony didn't elaborate. He just let the words hang, like a curtain half lifted. Richard's eyes narrowed, but he didn't press, not yet. Laura's tablet buzzed again. She read quickly, her face paling. "Compliance says Keller didn't just file complaints against workers. He filed 2 against supervisors as well. Both times dismissed, but—" She hesitated. Richard pressed. "But what?" Laura swallowed. "Both supervisors left the company within months." Gasps echoed. Danielle's voice shook with anger. "He drove them out." Miguel spat on the floor. "He built his career on lies." Harold growled. "And we carried the weight of it." Anthony finally broke the silence. "Not anymore." For the first time in years, the workers weren't divided. They weren't scattered groups whispering in corners. They were united, clapping, nodding, speaking out together. One welder shouted, "Green's the only one who's ever walked these aisles without looking down on us." Another added, "He listens." "Keller never did." Danielle's voice rose. "And when he talks like the floor matters, not just the numbers." The applause grew, swelling into cheers. Richard Coleman watched, his brow furrowed. He had walked dozens of floors, seen dozens of managers rise and fall, but never had he seen a floor rally this hard behind one man. Anthony let the noise wash over him, but his thoughts drifted inward. He remembered a mentor early in his career, a plant director who told him, "Don't lead from the office, lead from the floor. If you can't look a welder in the eye and mean what you say, you're not leading, you're hiding." That mentor was gone now, retired, but the lesson lived. And in this moment, Anthony knew this was the test of whether he had honored it. Richard finally spoke, his voice carrying over the cheers. "Compliance will finish its review, but what I see is a workforce united behind Green. And that tells me more than any log or report." He turned, his gaze narrowing on Anthony. "But it also tells me something else. You're not just another engineer, are you?" The floor went silent. All eyes swung to Anthony Green. He didn't answer, not yet. He only folded his hands again, steady as ever, because he knew the reveal was coming. The chants hadn't stopped echoing even after Anthony Green raised his hand. "Tell us, tell us, tell us!" The sound rolled across the factory like a drumbeat, uneven but powerful, rising from welders, machinists, forklift drivers, interns. Even workers from other aisles drifted closer, curiosity pulling them in. And still, Anthony stood silent, hands folded, letting the voices rise. Because he knew suspense was a teacher, and the floor was learning who truly carried weight here. Richard Coleman's deep voice cut through the chants. "Enough." The noise dwindled, but the energy stayed. Richard's eyes locked on Anthony. "Green, the games are over. Compliance is watching. The floor is watching. I'm watching. Say it plain. Who are you?" Every head turned. Danielle Moore's arms crossed, her smirk daring Anthony to spill it. Miguel Alvarez leaned forward, whispering, "Come on, Jefe." Emma Collins clutched her clipboard so tightly her knuckles turned white. Harold Dixon's weathered eyes narrowed, his chest rising with anticipation. Anthony took a slow breath. His voice came calm, deep, unhurried. "You want the truth?" The crowd hushed. "Here it is." Anthony stepped forward, his boots echoing on the concrete. He picked up the yellow-tagged lockbox, holding it steady in his hands. "This box? It doesn't belong to Keller. It doesn't belong to security. It doesn't even belong to HR." He set it back down on the bench, the clang echoing like a gavel. "It belongs to me." because everything in this plant falls under my responsibility." Gasps rippled. Anthony's gaze swept across the workers, then landed on Richard Coleman. "My name is Anthony Green, and I am not just an engineer, I am the plant director." The floor exploded. Cheers, shouts, gasps, laughter. Danielle's arms shot into the air. Miguel slapped the pallet jack, grinning ear to ear. Emma's jaw dropped. Harold Dixon threw back his head and let out a booming laugh. Even Richard Coleman's eyes widened slightly, though his face remained composed. Emma whispered, "Director?" Her voice cracked with disbelief. Miguel shouted, "I knew it! I told you all along!" Danielle laughed, shaking her head. "Oh, Keller, if only you'd listened instead of screamed." The machinists clapped. Welders pounded gloves against steel. Operators cheered. The noise wasn't chaos. It was celebration. For the first time in years, the floor wasn't united by fear. It was united by truth. Richard Coleman let the cheers roll for a moment before raising his hand. His voice boomed. Silence. The noise tapered off, though the energy still thrummed. Richard's gaze fixed on Anthony. "So it's true. You've been director all along." And Keller accused his own superior of theft. Anthony's reply was calm. "Yes," Richard exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "I've seen arrogance before, but that is something else." Robert Lang's voice came through Laura Benton's tablet. "Confirmed. Green was appointed plant director 8 months ago. Keller's personnel file showed no record of awareness, but that doesn't excuse his actions. All accusations against Green are void. Keller's case escalates to corporate review immediately." The crowd murmured louder. Harold Dixon barked, 8 months! No wonder Green walked like he owned the floor, because he did," Danielle added. "And he still treated us like people, not pawns." Miguel grinned wide. "That's a real boss." Anthony finally turned to the workers, his voice rising steady and strong. "I didn't keep my title hidden to trick anyone. I kept it quiet because titles don't build trust. Actions do. I walk this floor every day because that's how leadership lives. Not in offices, not in emails, but here, where steel is bent and sweat is shed." The workers cheered again, louder than before. Anthony raised his hand. "But understand this. A title doesn't protect me. It doesn't protect any of us. Only truth does. And today, truth stood taller than suspicion." The applause thundered, shaking the rafters. Richard Coleman watched, his face unreadable, but inside, gears turned. He'd seen directors cling to their offices, barking orders from behind glass walls. He'd seen managers weaponize policy to control workers, but he'd never seen a director win the floor with silence, patience, and truth. When he finally spoke, his voice carried respect. "Director Green, you've handled this with a steadiness I rarely see. Compliance will finalize Keller's removal, but as far as I'm concerned, your leadership speaks louder than any memo." Anthony inclined his head slightly. "Thank you." Harold Dixon stepped forward, his voice booming. "Brothers, sisters, you saw it yourselves. Green isn't just our director. He's one of us. He stood with us in the fire. And that's what leadership is." The workers roared in agreement. Danielle's eyes shone with pride. Miguel raised a fist. Emma smiled, relief flooding her features. The floor had chosen its leader, and it wasn't Keller. It never had been. As the cheers swelled, Laura Benton's tablet buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, her face tightening. "Director Green," she said cautiously, "corporate just flagged something else. Keller wasn't acting alone." The room froze. Richard's head snapped toward her. "Explain." Laura's voice trembled. "There are other names, other managers. This wasn't just one man's pride. It was a pattern." Gasps erupted. Danielle cursed under her breath. Miguel muttered, "So it goes deeper." Emma's eyes widened. Harold's face hardened. Anthony's expression didn't change. Calm, steady. Because he knew the fight wasn't over. The cheers were still echoing when Laura Benton's words dropped like a hammer. Keller wasn't acting alone. There are other names. This wasn't just one man's pride, it was a pattern. The celebration stuttered, murmurs rippled, faces hardened. The revelation shifted the air. Keller was gone, but his shadow had just grown larger. Danielle Moore's smirk vanished, replaced with sharp anger. "Other managers? You mean he wasn't the only one pulling this garbage?" Miguel Alvarez cursed under his breath. So all those shortages, all those false reports, it wasn't just him? Emma Collins clutched her clipboard tighter, her young voice trembling. It's bigger? Harold Dixon's face was grim. Of course it's bigger. Pride doesn't live alone. It breeds. And if Keller thought he could get away with it, others did too. The crowd stirred again, whispers overlapping, fear mixing with anger. Richard Coleman's voice cut through the noise. Laura, give me names. Laura's eyes scanned her tablet. Preliminary. Compliance flagged 3 other supervisors in Keller's chain of contacts. Notes about suspicious complaints, mysteriously closed cases, repeated shortages pinned on floor workers. Gasps, murmurs. Richard's jaw tightened. So this plant has been bleeding trust from the inside for years. Anthony Green finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. And today is where it ends. He stepped into the center of aisle 3, the workers closing around him like a circle. His presence carried weight now, not hidden, not hinted, but fully declared. I told you earlier this wasn't about me. It wasn't even about Keller. It was about trust. And now we see the full picture. Trust wasn't broken by one man. It was broken by a culture that allowed suspicion to grow louder than truth. The workers nodded, some muttering, "That's right," others clapping softly. Anthony's voice rose. That culture dies today, and in its place, we build something new. Danielle leaned forward, eyes sharp. Miguel crossed his arms, nodding. Emma's wide eyes glistened with hope. Harold stood tall, pride glowing in his weathered features. Anthony continued. From this day forward, no accusation stands without evidence. No complaint disappears into silence. Every voice on this floor will be heard. Every concern logged, tracked, answered. Because dignity is not optional. It is the foundation. The crowd erupted in applause. Richard Coleman didn't interrupt. He watched. He listened. He studied the way the floor rallied, the way Anthony commanded not just attention, but belief. Inside, Richard thought, this is leadership corporate can't manufacture. This is what we've been missing. Anthony raised a hand, the room quieting instantly. 3 reforms begin today. First, weekly open forums. No filters, no fear. Any worker, any engineer, any supervisor can speak directly to me. Second, transparency and compliance. Every complaint logged is visible. No more silent closures, no more hidden files. Third, training for dignity. Not just machines, not just safety, dignity. Because if you can't respect the person beside you, you don't belong on this floor. The cheers were thunderous. Workers clapped, stomped, whistled. Danielle raised her clipboard like a flag. Miguel pumped his fist. Emma beamed. Harold's booming laugh echoed like thunder. Anthony thought back to the young engineer he once knew in Texas, the one accused of falsifying data because a sensor failed. She had been brilliant, sharp, full of potential. But the accusation destroyed her confidence, and she left the industry for good. That memory burned in him every time he walked a floor, every time suspicion landed on someone undeserved. And today, standing in aisle 3, he vowed silently, never again. Robert Lang's voice crackled from the tablet. Director Green, compliance acknowledges your reforms. Corporate will monitor this plant as a pilot program for the entire region. If it succeeds, your model becomes standard. Gasps spread through the crowd. Danielle muttered, he's changing more than just this floor. Miguel grinned. He's changing the whole company. Emma whispered, he's making history. Richard Coleman finally stepped forward, his deep voice carrying weight. Director Green, corporate stands behind you. Your reforms are approved. Keller's suspension escalates to termination. The supervisors flagged by compliance will face full investigation. The floor roared in approval. Richard's eyes softened slightly. And as for you, your leadership here today will be documented. But more than that, it will be remembered. Anthony inclined his head. Not for me, for them. He gestured toward the workers. Because they're the reason this place survives. The workers erupted in cheers. Danielle clapped hard. Miguel shouted. Emma even let out a small laugh of relief. Harold raised his arms like a preacher calling a congregation. This, Harold boomed, is what it looks like when truth wins, when trust stands taller than lies, when leadership doesn't hide but walks with the people. The floor cheered louder, stamping boots on concrete, pounding gloves on rails. The noise rattled the rafters. Anthony raised his hand again, silencing them one last time. Today, a manager tried to brand me a thief, but I wasn't the only one he branded. He branded all of you. Because when suspicion poisons the floor, it poisons everyone. But together, we prove something bigger. That truth doesn't break. That trust can be rebuilt. That dignity is stronger than fear. He paused, scanning the faces, tired, sweaty, but alive with pride. And as long as I stand here as your plant director, no one, no manager, no supervisor, no executive will ever turn suspicion into power again. The floor erupted. Cheers, stomps, whistles, claps. For the first time in a long time, the factory floor didn't just feel like a place of work. It felt like a place of strength. Hours later, as shifts rotated, the story spread like wildfire. Keller had been suspended. Green was revealed as director. Corporate had backed reforms. But the detail workers repeated most wasn't compliance or policy. It was the image of Anthony Green, standing calm and steady in aisle 3, accused of theft and never flinching. Because leadership wasn't about titles, it wasn't about shouting, it was about standing firm when suspicion screamed loudest and letting truth do the work. And in Midwest Industrial Components on that day, truth stood taller than steel.